In the quiet of the night, when the world falls silent, the shadows of the past begin to whisper. Stories of lives cut short, of secrets buried deep, of betrayals that turned love to ash and ambition to ruin. These are not tales of fiction, but of real people, real pain, and real darkness. Welcome the shadows of the past, where we unravel the chilling truths behind crimes that haunt the corners of history. Tonight, we bring you Volume 3, a collection of true crime stories that will pull you into a world of mystery, heartbreak, and unrelenting questions. Settle in, close your eyes, and let the rain guide you through these tales of tragedy, but beware, for the past never truly stays buried. Part 1, The Forgotten Death of Larry Holmes. In the chaos of September 11, 2001, the world stood still. The skies burned, the towers fell, and the heartbeat of a nation faltered. But in the shadow of that unimaginable tragedy, another life was stolen. One that would be all but forgotten in the roar of history. This is the story of Larry Holmes, a man whose death became a footnote in a day that changed the world. Larry Holmes was no hero in the eyes of the masses. He was a 48-year-old construction worker from Newark, New Jersey, a man of callous hands and quiet resolve. He'd fought his way through a troubled past, demons he kept at bay with the love of his wife, Evelyn, and the hope he poured into his son, Devin. Larry wasn't perfect, but he was steady, reliable. The kind of man who woke before dawn, kissed his wife goodbye, and carried the weight of his family's dreams on his broad shoulders. That morning, as the world watched the unimaginable unfold on their screens, Larry was at a Brooklyn construction site, hammer in hand, sweat on his brow. The news broke through the static of a battered radio. Planes had struck the World Trade Center. The site went quiet. Workers gathered around a small TV in the foreman's office, watching as smoke billowed and hope crumbled. Larry's heart sank, not for himself, but for Evelyn and Devin, waiting back home in Newark. He had to get to them. He left the site in a hurry, his work boots pounding the pavement, his mind racing with fear. Brooklyn's streets were a maze of panic, sirens wailing, people running, the air thick with dread. Larry didn't know it, but he was walking into his own tragedy. At a quiet corner, two figures emerged from the shadows, young men, barely out of their teens. They saw Larry's worn jacket, his hurried steps, and the bulge of a wallet in his pocket. In a city unraveling, they saw opportunity. The attack was swift. A knife flashed, words were shouted, and Larry, caught off guard, tried to fight back, but the blade found its mark, again and again. Blood stained the sidewalk as Larry fell, his strength fading, his thoughts on Evelyn's smile, on Devin's laughter. The thieves grabbed his wallet, barely $20 inside, and vanished into the chaos. Larry Holmes, a man who'd fought for every moment of his life, lay dying alone, his final breath swallowed by the city's screams. The police arrived too late. The world was too consumed by the collapsing towers to notice a single death in Brooklyn. Larry's body was taken to the morgue, his case marked as a robbery gone wrong, just another statistic in a city overwhelmed. Evelyn waited for him that night, her calls unanswered, her heart growing heavier with each passing hour. By morning, she knew. Devin, just a boy, clung to her as they faced a truth too cruel to bear. Larry was gone, and no one seemed to care. The investigation was cursory at best. Witnesses were scarce, evidence was lost in the shuffle, and the case grew cold. Evelyn and Devin were left to pick up the pieces of a life shattered not just by loss, but by the indifference of a world too broken to notice. Evelyn worked double shifts to keep food on the table, her eyes hollow with grief. Devin, once a bright-eyed kid, grew quiet, his anger simmering beneath the surface. They held on to each other, but the wound of Larry's death festered, untended, forgotten. Years passed, the world moved on, but the Holmes family didn't. Evelyn kept Larry's work boots by the door as if he might walk back in one day. Devin carried his father's pocket knife, a small piece of the man he'd lost. Then, a flicker of hope emerged. A dusty police report buried in an archive mentioned a witness, a shopkeeper who'd seen two young men fleeing the scene. The description was vague, but it was enough to reopen the case. Detectives traced the lead to Marcus Carter, a man now in his 30s, his life a string of petty crimes and regrets. The evidence piled up, a knife found in an old stash, a confession coerced by the weight of guilt. Marcus admitted to the robbery, to the panic that turned a simple theft into murder. His accomplice, long gone, was never found, but Marcus faced justice alone. He was sentenced to life. His name, a bitter footnote in the Holmes family story. For Evelyn and Devon, the conviction brought no peace. Justice was a hollow word when the man they loved was still gone. They stood at Larry's grave, the wind carrying their whispered promises to live for him, to honor him. Oh, but the world had moved on, and Larry's death remained a quiet tragedy, overshadowed by a day that shook the earth. What does it mean to be forgotten? To die in a moment when the world's eyes are turned elsewhere. Larry Holmes was no hero to the masses, but to Evelyn and Devon, he was everything. His story is a reminder that every life matters, even those lost in the shadows of history's greatest storms. As we leave Larry's tale, ask yourself, what stories lie buried in the chaos of our own time, waiting for someone to listen? Part 2, The Sacrifice of James Carter. On September 11, 2001, the world watched as heroes rose from the ashes of tragedy. Firefighters, police officers, ordinary people who ran toward danger when others fled. Among them was James Carter, a New York firefighter whose courage would cost him everything. This is his story, a tale of sacrifice, love, and a family left to carry his legacy. James Carter was 38, a man built of grit and heart. His laugh could fill a room, his hands were steady in a crisis, and his love for his family was the fire that drove him. Anna, his wife, was his anchor, her quiet strength balancing his boundless energy. Their children, Emily and Jack, were his pride. Emily, 12, with her father's stubborn streak, and Jack, 8, who worshipped James like a superhero. To the Carters, life was simple. Love hard, work hard, and face whatever came with courage. That morning, James woke before dawn, as he always did. He kissed Anna goodbye, ruffled Jack's hair, and promised Emily he'd help with her science project later. Station 23 was his second home, a place where he and his crew shared coffee, jokes, and the unspoken bond of men who faced death together. When the call came in, a plane had hit the North Tower. James didn't hesitate. He grabbed his gear, his face set with the calm resolve of a man who knew his purpose. The scene at Ground Zero was hell on earth. Smoke choked the air, steel groaned, and screams echoed through the chaos. James and his crew plunged into the South Tower, guiding terrified office workers down stairwells, their radios crackling with urgent orders. He carried a woman on his back, her ankle broken, her sobs muffled against his jacket. He went back in again and again, each trip a gamble with fate. His last radio call was calm, almost gentle. We're getting them out, keep the line clear. Then the South Tower fell. A roar, like the end of the world. A cloud of dust and death. James Carter, along with countless others, was gone. His helmet, found days later in the rubble, was all that returned to his family. A cracked, soot-stained relic of a man who gave everything. Anna was at home when the news broke. The TV showed the towers collapsing over and over, a nightmare on repeat. She clutched the phone, calling James's station, his cell, anyone who might know. Hours passed, then days. Hope withered, replaced by a grief so heavy it threatened to crush her. Emily and Jack clung to her, their questions unanswered. Where's Dad? Is he coming home? Anna had no words, only tears. The days that followed were a blur of memorials, casseroles from neighbors, and the endless hum of news reports. James was hailed as a hero, his name etched on plaques, his sacrifice honored by a city in mourning. But to Anna, Emily, and Jack, he was more than a symbol. He was the man who made pancakes on Sundays, who taught Emily to ride a bike, who carried Jack on his shoulders. The world's praise couldn't fill the void he left behind. Anna faced the impossible task of moving forward. Bills piled up, the mortgage loomed, and grief made every step feel like wading through quicksand. She took a second job, her hands trembling as she sorted through James's belongings. His fireman's jacket hung in the closet, untouched, a silent reminder of the life they'd lost. Emily withdrew, her grades slipping, her anger flaring at anyone who tried to help. Jack stopped talking about his dad, as if silence could keep the pain at bay. The community rallied around them, fellow firefighters set up a fund for the kids' education, and Anna found solace in a support group for widows of 9/11. Slowly, they began to heal. Emily started writing letters to her father, pouring her heart onto pages she'd never send. Jack found comfort in James's old toolbox, tinkering with scraps of wood, building things the way his dad used to. And it kept James's memory alive, telling stories of his courage, his laugh, his love. Years later, the Carters stood at Ground Zero, now a place of quiet reflection. Emily, now a young woman, wore her father's badge on a chain around her neck. Jack, taller than James ever was, carried his father's strength in his steady gaze. Anna looked at the memorial, James's name carved among thousands, and felt a flicker of peace. They had lost so much, but they had found something too. A resilience forged in love, a legacy that no tragedy could erase. James Carter ran into the fire because it was who he was. His sacrifice saved lives, but it cost his family everything. As we leave his story, let it linger. What does it mean to be a hero? And what is the cost of courage? The rain falls softly now, carrying us to the next tale, where ambition turns deadly and the past refuses to stay silent. Part 3, The Fall of Michael Dunn. In the glittering world of Chicago's elite, Michael Dunn was a man who seemed to have it all: wealth, power, a family who adored him. But beneath the polished surface of his life lay a web of ambition and betrayal that would lead to his brutal end. This is the story of Michael Dunn, a cautionary tale of greed, treachery, and a family forced to rebuild from the ashes. Michael Dunn was a force in Chicago's business world, a man whose charm could close deals and whose ruthlessness could break rivals. He built an empire, but at a cost. His allies, Emily and Sloan, were once his closest confidants, partners in his climb to the top. But ambition is a hungry beast, and it turned friends into enemies. In a single calculated moment, Emily and Sloan betrayed Michael, their greed outweighing loyalty. A knife, a gunshot, a body left in a darkened office. Michael Dunn was dead, his empire crumbling with him. Claire, his wife, was left in a world turned upside down. She'd loved Michael fiercely, blind to the cracks in his perfect facade. The news of his murder came like a thunderbolt, shattering her carefully built life. Claire retreated from the public eye, shielding her children, Alex and Sophie, from the venom of Chicago's gossip. The world painted Michael as a villain, a man whose ambition invited his own destruction. Claire knew better. He was flawed, yes, but he was hers, and now he was gone. Sophie, just 14, found solace in art. Her paintings became a canvas for her pain. Swirls of black and red, figures bent under the weight of loss. Each stroke was a scream she couldn't voice, a way to reclaim the narrative of a childhood stolen by betrayal. Alex, older and angrier, wrestled with his father's legacy. Michael had been his hero, but now he was a ghost, his name tainted by the choices that led to his end. Together, Sophie and Alex navigated a world that felt hollow without their father, their bond the only anchor in the storm. The investigation was relentless. Detectives peeled back the layers of Michael's life, uncovering deals gone sour, promises broken, and the bitter envy of those he'd outmaneuvered. Emily and Sloan, once trusted allies, were the architects of his death. Their motive was simple: greed. They wanted Michael's empire, and they were willing to kill for it. The evidence was damning: phone records, financial trails, a bloodied weapon hidden in a storage unit. They were arrested, their once bright futures reduced to the cold walls of a prison cell. For Claire, justice was a bitter pill. The trial exposed every flaw in Michael's life, every secret he'd kept from her. She sat in the courtroom, her hands clasped tightly, listening as the man she loved was dissected by strangers. Emily and Sloan were convicted, sentenced to life, but the verdict couldn't undo the damage. Claire learned to forgive, not for their sake, but for her own. She found peace in small moments: Sophie's laughter, Alex's quiet strength, the warmth of a new life she began to build. Sophie's art became her salvation. Her sculptures, raw and haunting, spoke of loss and resilience. Galleries displayed her work, each piece a testament to a girl who turned pain into power. Alex, too, found his path, channeling his anger into purpose. He studied law, determined to fight for those who, like his father, were betrayed by those they trusted. Together, they carried Michael's memory, not the man the world condemned, but the father who'd loved them fiercely. Chicago never forgot Michael Dunn. His story became a legend, a warning whispered in boardrooms and bars. Ambition unchecked is a dangerous thing. The city moved on, but the scars remained, etched in the lives of those who loved him. Claire, Sophie, and Alex rebuilt, piece by piece, their strength a quiet rebellion against the darkness that tried to claim them. As we leave Michael's story, consider this: what price do we pay for our dreams? And when ambition blinds us, who pays the cost? The rain falls heavier now, pulling us deeper into the shadows where another life hangs in the balance, and the truth is a dangerous thing to uncover. Part 4. The Murder of Nathaniel Hayes. In the quiet suburb of Westfield, just outside Chicago, January 14, 2002 began like any other day. The snow fell softly, blanketing the streets in a deceptive calm. But inside an upscale home on a tree-lined street, a brutal crime was unfolding. One that would unravel an empire built on lies. This is the story of Nathaniel Hayes, a man whose ambition made him enemies and whose death exposed the darkness at the heart of his world. Nathaniel Hayes was a titan in the construction industry, a 42-year-old businessman whose sharp mind and relentless drive turned a modest startup into a Midwest powerhouse. He was meticulous, charismatic, and utterly ruthless. To those who knew him, Nathaniel was a paradox, a man who could charm a room and ruin a career with the same smile. His wealth grew, but so did his enemies. In an industry where deals were won by stepping on others, Nathaniel left a trail of broken dreams in his wake. That morning, police were called to Nathaniel's home after a neighbor reported an open door. They found him in the living room, sprawled near a bay window, his body riddled with bullets. Blood pooled on the hardwood, the room eerily untouched except for the violence that claimed him. No forced entry, no stolen goods, no signs of a struggle. This was no random act, it was personal, calculated, cold. Detective Jennifer Brooks took the case, her instincts screaming that the killer knew Nathaniel well. She dove into his life, uncovering a man who thrived on control. Nathaniel's business dealings were a labyrinth of ambition and deceit, zoning permits bought with bribes, rivals crushed without mercy. One name surfaced, Daniel Pierce, a former employee fired after a failed project cost Nathaniel millions. Daniel had blamed Nathaniel, threatening to expose his unethical practices. Witnesses placed him near the house the night of the murder, arguing with Nathaniel through a car window. But Daniel wasn't the only player. Robert Deliard, a wealthy investor, emerged as a shadow in Nathaniel's world. Robert had backed Nathaniel's projects, but their partnership soured when a deal went bad, costing Robert millions. The deeper Brooks dug, the clearer it became. Daniel and Robert had conspired. Daniel, driven by revenge, pulled the trigger, but Robert, fueled by financial ruin, orchestrated the plan. A partial fingerprint on the murder weapon sealed their fate. The trial was a spectacle. Daniel claimed manipulation, Robert denied involvement, but the evidence was overwhelming. Phone records, financial trails, and a chilling confession painted a picture of greed and betrayal. Both men were convicted of first-degree murder, sentenced to life without parole. Westfield reeled, its business community fractured by the revelation of Nathaniel's corruption. Claire, Nathaniel's widow, was left to pick up the pieces. She'd loved a man she thought she knew, only to discover his life was a lie. Alex and Sophie, their children, grappled with a father who was both hero and villain. Alex, 18, became the family's protector, his anger a shield against the world. Sophie, 14, retreated into her art, her drawings a silent scream of confusion and loss. Claire moved them away, seeking a fresh start, but the shadow of Nathaniel's choices followed. Westfield never recovered its innocence. Nathaniel's empire collapsed, his projects abandoned, his name a cautionary tale. Claire found purpose in charity, helping victims of violence, while Alex and Sophie forged their own paths, determined to live with integrity. Nathaniel Hayes had climbed too high, too fast, and his fall dragged everyone down with him. What drives a man to betray those who trust him? And what does it cost those left behind? Nathaniel's story is a mirror, reflecting the dangers of ambition unchecked. As the rain whispers on, we move to another town, another tragedy, where love turns to obsession and a single act shatters a community. Part 5, The Obsession of Emily Weston. In the small town of Brentwood, January 15, 2002 dawned cold and quiet. The streets were lined with modest homes, the kind where neighbors waved and everyone knew your name. But beneath the surface of this idyllic town, a darkness was brewing. A darkness that would claim the life of Emily Weston, a beloved teacher whose kindness touched countless lives. This is her story, a chilling reminder that sometimes the greatest danger comes from those we once loved. Emily Weston was 32, a third-grade teacher whose warmth lit up Brentwood's elementary school. She stayed late to tutor struggling students, organized bake sales for charity, and greeted everyone with a smile that felt like home. Her life was simple but full, until Michael Davis entered it. Michael, an accountant with a quick wit and a troubled heart, swept Emily off her feet. They were engaged, their future bright, until his jealousy and instability tore them apart. Emily ended it, moving on with quiet resolve. Michael didn't. On the morning of January 15, Emily didn't show up for school. Her students waited, puzzled, until a colleague called her neighbor, Mrs. Reynolds. The elderly woman found Emily's door ajar, the house unnaturally still. Inside, she discovered Emily's body, her face marred by blunt force trauma, blood pooling around her. The living room was in disarray, a broken picture frame holding a photo of Emily and Michael lying near her body. This was no robbery, it was rage, personal and unrelenting. Detective Sarah Thompson took the case, her seasoned eyes catching the subtle clues, no forced entry, a struggle, and that damning photo. Michael Davis became the focus. Friends revealed his obsession, his uninvited visits, his desperate texts. A search of his home uncovered a shrine to Emily, her scarf, old letters, journal entries, seething with betrayal. Michael confessed under pressure. He'd gone to her house to win her back, but her rejection ignited his fury. He struck her with a heavy object, over and over until she was gone. The trial was a wound for Brentwood. Michael's defense claimed a crime of passion, but the evidence told a different story. Premeditation, obsession, a man who couldn't let go. He was convicted of first-degree murder, sentenced to life without parole. Emily's family mourned, their grief compounded by the betrayal of a man they'd once welcomed. Her students, her colleagues, her town, they all felt the loss, a light extinguished too soon. Brentwood fought to heal. A scholarship in Emily's name kept her spirit alive, and the town embraced programs to raise awareness about obsessive relationships. Sarah Thompson, haunted by the case, pushed for change, determined to spot the signs she'd missed. Emily's legacy became one of compassion, a reminder to cherish those who light up our lives. What turns love into obsession? And how do we heal when the one who hurts us is the one we trusted most? Emily Weston's story lingers, a whisper in the rain, urging us to see the warning signs before it's too late. Another tale awaits, where greed and betrayal tear a family apart, and the truth is a heavy burden. Part 6, The Betrayal of Alison Hayes. In the snow-covered streets of Springfield, January 15, 2002, a scream shattered the morning calm. Alison Hayes, a businesswoman and philanthropist, lay dead in her kitchen, a single gunshot wound to her chest. The man who found her was her husband, Thomas, a man whose grief hid a darker truth. This is the story of Alison Hayes, a woman whose love was her undoing, and a family torn apart by betrayal. Alison was 40, a beacon in Springfield's community. Her company, Hayes Enterprises, was a success, but her true legacy was her kindness. Scholarships for local kids, shelters for the homeless. She was a devoted mother to Emily and Ryan, and a wife to Thomas, a man whose charm masked a growing desperation. Their marriage, once a partnership, had frayed under the weight of, Thomas's secrets. That morning, a neighbor saw Thomas pacing outside their home, his face pale, his hands shaking. He claimed he'd found Alison after returning from a business trip, but Detective Robert Hayes, no relation, sensed something off. Thomas's grief seemed rehearsed, his story too neat. The crime scene told a different tale. No forced entry, signs of a struggle, a single bullet fired with precision. This was no stranger's work. The investigation peeled back the layers of Thomas's life. He'd been embezzling from Alison's company, funneling money to offshore accounts to fund an affair with Laura Blackwell, a young secretary. Alison, suspecting his betrayal, had hired a divorce lawyer threatening to expose him. Thomas, cornered by the loss of his wealth and status, made a choice. In the early hours, he shot Alison, staging the scene to look like a robbery gone wrong. The evidence was damning. Financial records, a hidden safe with incriminating documents, Laura's reluctant testimony. Thomas was arrested, his trial a public reckoning. He claimed emotional distress, but the jury saw through his lies. Convicted of first-degree murder, he was sentenced to life without parole. Springfield's trust in its own was shattered. The Hayes name forever tainted. Emily and Ryan, teenagers thrust into a nightmare, faced a world without their mother and a father revealed as a monster. Emily channeled her grief into social work, helping others as Alison had. Ryan, consumed by anger, spiraled into addiction before finding redemption through therapy. Claire, their mother's strength in them, fought to give them a future, her charity work a tribute to Alison's legacy. Springfield learned a hard lesson. Even the perfect family can hide darkness. Alison's foundation grew, supporting victims of abuse, but her absence lingered. Thomas, in his cell, faced the weight of his choices. A man who traded love for greed and lost everything. What does it mean to betray the ones who love you? And how do you rebuild when the foundation is gone? Alison's story is a wound, raw and real, carried by those who loved her. The rain falls harder now, pulling us to another tragedy where ambition breeds violence and the past demands justice. Part 7 of The Rage of George Blackwell. In the quiet town of Pinehurst, January 15, 2002 began with a chilling discovery. George Blackwell, a real estate mogul and philanthropist, was found dead in his study, his body battered, his life stolen in a moment of rage. This is the story of George Blackwell, a man whose ambition built an empire and enemies, and whose death revealed the cost of greed. George was 50, a towering figure in Pinehurst. His real estate deals shaped the town's skyline, his charity work earned him praise. But behind the polished image was a man who thrived on power. His latest project, a plan to demolish historic buildings for a new development, sparked outrage. Daniel Rizzo, a local businessman whose property was targeted, led the charge. His protest laced with threats. Margaret, George's wife, found him that morning, her screams echoing through their grand home. Detective David Walker arrived to a scene of brutal violence. George, slumped in his chair, his head crushed by repeated blows. No forced entry, no stolen goods. The killer knew George, and their anger was personal. Margaret, shattered, could offer no clues. Her grief, a wall between her and the truth. Walker dug into George's world, uncovering a trail of broken promises. His charm won allies, but his ruthlessness bred enemies. Daniel Rizzo emerged as a suspect, his business crumbling under George's pressure. Phone records showed heated calls between them, and witnesses recalled Rizzo's growing desperation. Confronted, Rizzo confessed. He'd gone to George's home to negotiate, but their argument exploded. In a blind rage, he struck George, the blows fueled by months of humiliation. The trial shook Pinehurst. Rizzo's defense claimed a crime of passion, but the jury saw intent. Convicted of second-degree murder, he was sentenced to 25 years. Margaret and their children, Sarah and Daniel, faced a fractured legacy. Margaret became an advocate for victims of financial abuse, her pain a catalyst for change. Sarah pursued social work. Daniel battled anger before finding peace, but George's shadow loomed. Pinehurst grappled with its loss of innocence. George's project stalled, his name a warning. Ambition can be a poison. The town grew closer, its scars a reminder to value integrity over wealth. What drives a man to violence, and what does it cost those left behind? George Blackwell's story is a storm, raging and raw, a testament to the dangers of unchecked power. The rain carries us now to our final tale, where desperation turns deadly, and the truth is a heavy price. Part 8, The Desperation of Vincent Harris. In the heart of Brooklyn, January 15, 2002, was a night of bitter cold and darker deeds. Vincent Harris, a self-made millionaire, lay dead in his penthouse, a single bullet ending his empire. His killer was no stranger, but someone he trusted, a woman driven to the edge by her own demons. This is the story of Vincent Harris, a man whose success masked his flaws and whose death exposed the fragility of trust. Vincent was 45, a real estate tycoon who rose from Queens streets to Brooklyn's elite. His charm opened doors, his ruthlessness kept them open. He donated to charities, funded scholarships, but his deals left rivals ruined. Claire Thompson, his assistant, was his shadow. Efficient, loyal, and hiding a secret that would destroy them both. Claire found Vincent that night, slumped over his desk, blood pooling beneath him. Detective Michael Carter arrived, noting the precision of the shot, the untouched office, the open door. This was no robbery, it was execution. Claire's nervous demeanor raised flags, her story of a routine meeting unraveling under scrutiny. Carter uncovered her past, a brief affair with Vincent, a gambling addiction, debts piling higher than she could climb. The truth emerged like a slow poison. Claire, drowning in debt, saw Vincent's safe fill with cash as her salvation. She went to his penthouse, her plea for help turning to rage when he refused. A gun hidden in her bag became her answer. She shot him, staging the scene to look like a hit, but surveillance footage caught her fleeing, her plan crumbling under the weight of evidence. The trial was a reckoning. Claire's defense claimed desperation, but the prosecution painted a calculated killer. Convicted of first-degree murder, she was sentenced to life without parole. Vincent's family, his brother Michael, his children, faced a betrayal that cut deeper than the loss. Brooklyn reeled, its faith in heroes shaken by Vincent's flaws and Claire's treachery. The city moved on, but Vincent's story lingered. His children carried his memory, tainted but theirs. Claire in her cell faced a life of regret, her desperation a change she'd never escape. Brooklyn learned a hard truth. Success is fragile, and trust is a risk. What pushes someone to betray, and how do we live with the pieces of a broken trust? Vincent Harris's story is a whisper in the dark, a reminder that even the brightest lives can end in shadow. As the rain fades, we leave you with these tales, their truths echoing in the silence. The rain has carried us through 8 stories, each a window into the darkness that hides in plain sight. From the forgotten death of Larry Holmes to the desperate act of Claire Thompson, these tales remind us that every choice has a cost and every life leaves a mark. Shadows of the Past bids you good night, but the questions linger. What secrets lie buried in your own world? And what truths will the rain uncover next? Sleep well, if you can.